I just want to mention another thing. We are a week plus 1 day away or past that shooting at number 1 Queen Street in Auckland, which unfolded while we were on air last Thursday. And I would make the observation how quickly a news cycle moves on. And how, whilst at the time we were all shocked, outraged and everything else, how quickly that story is going to become history. It shouldn't. It shouldn't, because the reasons and the circumstances around the now dead gunman being out with an ankle bracelet for serious violent offenders, I think that's still very, very much an issue. But just think about it. Just take yourself back a week. What was the big story? It's hardly mentioned now, is it? Because we've got all sorts of political shenanigans and other stuff going on. And it seems to me often we look for the sensation, we move on, we see what's trending without worrying and without paying attention to the real underlying issues that might face our community and our society. And one of those issues is, in my humble opinion, freedom of speech, our ability to associate, share ideas, even unpopular ideas, without fear of being, and it kind of feeds in maybe into the Kevin Spacey thing, without fear of being cancelled, taken out, or indeed facing sanction from the state itself for speaking our minds, for being free of thought and speech. In case you didn't know it, the government plans, or there are proposals from the Department of Internal Affairs for a powerful new regulator to basically monitor and censor free speech on the internet in all sorts of areas. It would wants to disband the Broadcasting Standards Authority and just have this regulator that could fine you and do bad things to you and to companies if you say the wrong thing on the interweb. The Free Speech Union, which is the country's preeminent lobby group on behalf of free speech, has launched a campaign against it. Part of that is the advertising you hear on the platform, and also a petition or an organised campaign to get New Zealanders to make submissions to the Department of Internal Affairs. The date for those submissions, I think, ends next week. How is the campaign going? Well, we're joined now by Jonathan Ayling from the Free Speech Union. Jonathan, nice to talk again. How is it going?
Morning, Sean. Very well. You started off your intro there by saying you may have heard about these proposals by the Department of Internal Affairs, and unfortunately, the vast majority of Kiwis haven't heard. Polling released by us earlier this week shows that 25% of Kiwis have heard that the Department of Internal Affairs is planning one of the most extensive reforms of censorship in a generation at least. And so what we know is that the significant overreach has been done without really any oversight from the public, and that's really concerning. So that's why we are doing what we can to bring more attention to the intentions here and let people decide whether this is the path forward that they want to pursue. So we've had, at my last count, I believe it's about 12,000 people use our submission tool to submit to the government. And that's quite a significant response, and I'm confident we'll continue to see that tick up over the weekend as we see submissions close next Monday.
Yeah. It's essentially, though, Jonathan, a cut and paste, isn't it? Cut and paste submission.
Not in the slightest, Sean. That's not correct. We've worked very hard. Nowadays, form submissions just aren't cutting it. If you do a cut and paste submission, as other campaigns have done in the past, and probably as some of your supporters have used, what ends up happening is the ministry or the select committee or whoever it is receiving this will treat all the submissions as one. They're effectively the same. They've just got a different signature at the bottom, and so it's treated as a form submission and considered as one. What we've done is worked really hard with our IT team, and we have a number of points that will they self-populate, but every single submission will be quite unique. And we've got templates there up to 20 20,000. Once we have over 20,000 submissions, there might be a few duplicates starting to emerge, but up to 20,000, they will be unique, which means DIA can't treat this as a form submission. They can't say that everyone is just saying the exact same phrases. We're letting people use their own words and express their own opinions and helping them along the way. It still only takes 5 minutes. But I think our team has worked really hard to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for everyday Kiwis to engage in democracy, to engage in this consultation, but also not have to be experts themselves and spend an hour doing it.
Will there be actual physical hearings on this or submissions?
No. So at the moment, we're at the policy consultation phase. So that's where DIA is looking at how the legislation would be drafted. As we get further down the line, we would have, once it gets to Parliament, we would see legislation introduced, and then there would be a select committee process, and then there would be an opportunity also to have oral engagement with a select committee. What I think is worth underlining is the fact that at the moment the call for change is being made because apparently we have a wild west when it comes to online content and speech, and that is simply untrue. It's almost like, Sean, we need a word like misinformation or something that that tells us that's not correct. And only 23% of Kiwis in our polling knew of another piece of legislation that actually currently regulates content online. And so this is part of the theory that's been proposed, the misinformation, if you will, that at the moment there's nothing in place, and radicals out there that, like the Free Speech Union, want you to be able to say any horrific thing that you want, and at the moment there would be no consequences, and all we're trying to do
have been, I know, online in spaces that most people listening thankfully don't need to go to, but in some social media you are definitely being painted as, Nazis, aren't you, the Free Speech Union?
Well, Kate Hanna would use that specific word, but I try not to take that personally, Sean, because I think about 1.3 million Kiwis in her mind fit in that category, so I don't feel very special with that nomenclature. But the point is, it's an entirely malconstructed idea that at the moment there's no regulation in place. There is considerable legislation and considerable consequences already in place for the most extreme content online. And you know what? When you're trying to promote other people to commit self-harm or inciting violence, or other features like that, other objectively objectionable content, there's no reason that it should be defended by free speech. But what we're talking about now is the basic ability to voice controversial perspectives and ideas. And the Prime Minister actually made a number of fantastic comments in the House earlier this week during question time in favour of free speech. And we welcome those comments. And I do believe that at the moment, he is committed to ensuring that...
Yeah, but what the Prime Minister is committed to and what the Labour Party wants to do are two quite different things, it would seem, if we look at the tax issue. I am going to ask you about that, though. Kiri Allen was a strong advocate for restrictions on free speech. She had made some comments before her appointment, while she was Justice Minister, before Jacinda Ardern left, that got her in a bit of trouble. Would you see her departure from the justice role as a positive step for free speech in this country?
I would say that any minister who has wanted to champion hate speech laws no longer having the capacity to pursue that is a positive. Whether you liked Kiri Allen or not, and I think a lot of the commentary over the past week has shown this, whether you liked her or not, she was a capable actor. She knew how to play the game of politics relatively well. And so with that in mind, it is probably a win in the fact that she won't be advocating for hate speech laws anymore. My concern is her departure will be filled with others who are probably equally committed to seeing these laws reformed. And I don't know if Ginny Anderson, who has taken the justice portfolio, is especially more committed to the really foundational notion of free speech. Of course, she would give lip service to it, but you can't really call yourself a pro-free speech justice minister while you would be advancing hate speech laws.
And these proposals in the DIA. Look, just a reminder to people, when's the cut-off for submissions again?
The submissions are open till Monday next week, the 31st
Okay,
of
so
July.
if people want to make some and learn more, where do they go? Jonathan?
Really, each one of your listeners right now should be going to freespeechsubmission.com, and the submission process to have your voice heard on these DIA proposals will take less than 5 minutes. But what we're trying to say is, actually, Kiwis' opinions online shouldn't be regulated. An Uber regulator, which is what has been proposed, a super regulator to set a code away from Parliament, away from any democratic accountability. Kiwis' voices will not be heard on what their voices can say, which is just it's profoundly ironic, but it's deeply troubling as well. It's actually a very undemocratic approach. And I don't know, Sean, how many of your listeners will be aware of what's happening in Australia right now. A grotesque piece of legislation, the misinformation bill over there. What we are seeing is the rise of pseudo-religious, almost medieval ways of thinking about knowledge and the way speech challenges ideas, and it's totally inconsistent with a liberal democracy.
And I've got to say, Jonathan, if people think these issues don't have, I don't know, real-time consequences or don't happen in the real world, I think at the moment one of the most fascinating and I find interesting debates or issues going on is the anti-co-governance meetings that Julian Batchelor is organising around the country. The fact that he is now reduced, or his organisation is reduced, to not saying where those meetings are, even though they're private meetings, because of the cancel culture amongst venues coming under pressure from a very organised anti-stop co-governance movement. And the arguments there, I find, over freedom of speech and right to protest are just fascinating and quite complex, because it now seems what might be regarded by some as a distasteful tour or racist. I'm not saying whether it is or not, but it is lawful. And then there's protest that is lawful but is trying to sort of shout down the anti-co-governance group. And this is really, I think that's unfortunately going to come to a head of physical confrontation. It's getting closer, it would seem to me, every week. What's the Free Speech Union's view on that as a real-time example of the conflicts and the problems of free speech?
It is exactly that, an apt illustration of the options at play. If this all started March this year, February this year, when Julian Batchelor first tried to hold a meeting up at Sports Northland. Look, at that point, if they had held the event and they would have had maybe 100 people around, he would have gone around the country. He would have said his piece.
Yeah.
He would, over that, he would have had a couple of thousand people show up. Probably not many that didn't already know what they thought on the subject, and he would have gone home. And he's turned into a household name, reviled on one side, championed on the other, a hero to some, because they've made this such a fraught issue. And so this is the Streisand effect, where you try and shut people down, and actually it will be counterproductive. And I don't know really how much these people who are trying to exactly shut him down and shut him out. Counter speech is absolutely appropriate, absolutely part of what it means to live in a liberal democracy. But I can't help but think what we're seeing here is attempting to be beyond that in many cases.
Well, Jonathan, one of the most disturbing developments this week has been that the Electoral Commission has become involved and issued a warning of prosecution and asked for more information from Julian Batchelor from the book or pamphlet he puts out, claiming that it's an election ad. Now, I've seen the letter they have sent, which is the result of an anonymous complaint to them. They will not say who's made the complaint. I think his lawyer's written a very reasonable letter in response saying we're not going to cooperate with you. We might change some wording, but we just think this is silly. And this is, once again, the state, I would say the Electoral Commission, being abused by those who would suppress free speech?
I haven't seen the material that's been circulated, Sean, so that would be important to see before I made a definitive comment. But what is absolutely clear is the fact that people are looking to weaponize the institutional structures against others to silence them. And that will not end well for them, but it will not end well for any of us. What that continues to do is degrade and undermine the institutional structures that we all have to live under. And we should be concerned by the fact that many Kiwis no longer have confidence, and I would say with some reason, in these structures that in the past served them, but now have become very elitist and very condescending of the very freedoms and rights that they exist to protect. And I think, when you see, we haven't discussed this extensively, but the Undercurrent podcast that's come out from Susie Ferguson and Kate Hanna, we mentioned this last week, but what features in each of the episodes pretty much that they have released there is this belief that the poor common man needs to be saved by their great intelligence and benevolence because, I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it by themselves, the poor things.
Well, I think that documentary series is in itself, though I don't mind it being published, it's disinformation. It is absolutely fear-mongering, isn't it?
It is exactly what it is. It is disinformation, it is propaganda, and absolutely it should. I like to know who my enemies are. So you put that out there, Kate Hanna, you put that out there, Susie Ferguson, and I think the coverage that we have put out has probably had a wider audience.
But look, I think the most disturbing thing there, Jonathan, about the Undercurrent documentary series, and be honest, I haven't got more than 5 minutes into any episode, and I just have better things to do, like, I don't know, pick my nose. But they are, if you like, seeding a narrative. And don't forget, this is made by the, Radio New Zealand, a huge state-funded media organisation that works in concert with Stuff and with the Spin-Off and with other news providers. They are sowing the idea, certainly in the latest episode I've had highlighted to me, that the result of the election is not going to be legitimate. It's almost Trump-like, the narrative they're creating.
That's right. I haven't listened to the most recent episode that came out yesterday, but I understand that there are real questions that have been laid around exactly whether what underpins that in my mind is whether the common person who might dare actually look at things on social media or who might actually consider perspectives other than what they're hearing from Radio New Zealand is actually in an appropriate space anymore if they've been co-opted and manipulated and deceived. There's an irony in that, not least of all being that misinformation is actually a term that emerged of all places, from the Soviet Union shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution. And so who are we resorting to here to tell us, the Politburo is breaking down on us now saying, no, the common person probably isn't well enough engaged to understand how these democracies are supposed to function, so we'll do it for them. It is the essence of authoritarian conservatism. It's the irony. Sean, you and I in this conversation are the lefties arguing for the common man.
Yeah, that's right. It's lovely to be a liberal. I am really concerned, to be honest, when we get down to this Radio New Zealand documentary series, that they appear to quite deliberately be planting the seeds or fertilising the soil for claims if the centre-left were to lose the next election, if Labour were to lose, they're almost doing the groundwork for a rebellion.
I would say that's probably overstating it at this stage, Sean. I haven't.
Oh, come on! I'm looking for a headline.
I would say that division is at such a state in this country. No matter what happens on October 14th. About half the country is going to be bloody pissed off.
Yeah,
I have hope that our democratic values, underpinned by free speech above all things, will actually mean we don't have rebellion. That's your word, or violence, or kind of.
It's just going to be so ironic if Kate Hanna and Susie Ferguson and Paula Penfold occupy Parliament because they think the results of the election aren't legitimate.
Well. You know what, Sean? We would defend their right to protest there.
Yes, and strangely enough, I would too. Just a reminder, because the submissions on the Department of Internal Affairs proposals for an Uber censorship body across everyone on the internet close on Monday, where do people go if they want to have their say and find out more and make a submission?
Sean, this is hate speech laws for the internet, and we need Kiwis to stand up and push back. So every one of your listeners should be looking at freespeechsubmission.com. It's 5 minutes, but it really helps us do our work, like with the hate speech laws over the past 2 years, and pushing back against the government and making sure we preserve this crucial freedom going forward.
Good on you, Jonathan. Always a pleasure, mate. Talk soon. That is Jonathan Ayling from the Free Speech Union. Someone has simply written knighthood for Jonathan. Well, I think he does important work. And editorially, it is a position we agree with here on the platform, and I'm happy to stand by it and say that. And yeah, do not, you could listen to Undercurrent, but basically now Susie Ferguson has got a whole lot of people saying, oh, well, look, there's so much disinformation now. I'm not sure we can have a fair and free election, and I don't know if the results of the election will be legitimate. That sounds very Donald Trumpish, Susie Ferguson and Radio New Zealand. And I think Paul Thompson, the CEO of Radio New Zealand, who's largely lost control of the organisation editorially, he's got these mad people like Megan Veal and their digital editor doing all sorts of strange stuff. He needs to have another good look. And I see their bullshit audit is out. I think Radio New Zealand almost, we have to ask the question, does it need to be entirely rethought and restructured? Do we need to start again? But yeah, their latest episode is the result of the election. You don't necessarily have to accept it because there's so much evil Nazi disinformation out there. It is off the planet weird stuff, to be honest.